Oh yeah, we are live on. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Hope you had a great Sunday. Thought of upgrading my portfolio. It's been more than a year. I haven't changed anything in that. It's pretty old. So anyhow, had no weekend plans. So yeah, let's start working on the portfolio. So I did a basic wireframing here. Usually I used to design on Figma, then code it, but this time I felt like it's too overkilling for a simple landing page kind of portfolio. I mean, for a portfolio, it's pretty overkill. That's what I felt. So I was quite lazy to redo all those things. So yeah, I have. Just hang on, guys. Where am I? Yeah, so this is the progress so far. I thought of doing it with the dark mode as a default one. I don't have a good picture. We'll upgrade this later on. I just it's bare minimum. I mean, it's not completed yet, but yeah, we'll. So this is the progress so far. I've been collecting few interesting portfolios for the inspiration. So I have compiled a few lists and. Uh, I'll leave this in the description. I'll give a shout out to everyone, like whoever I have referred to. I'll share this once I complete. I'll share this on Twitter. So next, yeah, without any further ado, let's get started. So I had this thing. I've been listening to Lex Fridman podcast from a really long time, and this was there in the long due, so I'll be listening to this. It's a long 3 hour, oh shit, it's 4 hours podcast. So I might not able to complete this, but I'll stop whenever I feel like I'm done, like whenever I'm tired. So yeah, so let's get started. Wait, splash tools, not showing up. Come on, monitor one, monitor two. Yes. So yeah, I'm using Next.js here. Well, I thought of going with the TypeScript, but again, I had to define types, all those things. I just want to finish this as soon as possible. That's all. Just
Of Sailor Academy, graduate of MIT, and Michael is one of the most fascinating and rigorous thinkers I've ever gotten a chance to explore ideas with. He can effortlessly zoom out to the big perspectives of human civilization and human history, and zoom back in to the technical details, blockchains, markets, governments, and financial systems. This is the Lex Fridman Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Michael Saylor. Let's start with the big question of truth and wisdom. When advanced humans or aliens or AI systems, let's say 5 to 10 centuries from now, look back at Earth on this early 21st century, how much do you think they would say we understood about money and economics, or even about engineering, science, life, death, meaning, intelligence, consciousness, all the big, interesting questions?
I think they would probably give us a B minus on engineering, on all the engineering things, the hard sciences.
Passing grade.
Like we're doing okay. We're working our way through rockets and jets and electric cars and electricity transport systems and nuclear power and space flight and the like. And if you look at the walls that grace the great court at MIT, it's full of all the great thinkers, and they're all pretty admirable. If you could be with Newton or Gauss or Madame Curie or Einstein, you would respect them. I would say they'd give us like a D minus on economics, like an F plus or a D minus.
You see, have an optimistic vision. First of all, optimistic vision of engineering, because everybody you've listed, not everybody, but most people you've listed, is just over the past couple of centuries. Maybe it stretches a little farther back, but mostly all the cool stuff we've done in engineering is the past couple of centuries.
I mean, Archimedes, had his virtues. I studied the history of science at MIT, and I also studied aerospace engineering. And so I clearly have a bias in favor of science. And if I look at the past 10,000 years and I consider all of the philosophy and the politics and their impact on the human condition, I think it's a wash. For every politician that came up with a good idea, another politician came up with a bad idea, right? And it's not clear to me that, most of the political and philosophical, contributions to the human race and the human conditions have advanced so much. I mean, we're still taking guidance and admiring Aristotle and Plato and Seneca and the like. And on the other hand, if you think about what has made the human condition better, fire, water, harnessing of wind energy, try to row across an ocean, right? Not easy.
And for people who are just listening or watching, there's a beautiful, sexy ship from 16th and 17th century.
This is a 19th century handmade model of a 17th century sailing ship, which is of the type that the Dutch East Indies Company used to sail the world and trade. So that was made, the original was made sometime in the 1600s, and then this model is made in the 19th century by individuals.
Both the model and the ship itself is engineering at its best. And just imagine, just like rockets flying out to space, how much hope this filled people with, exploring the unknown, going into the mystery. Both the entrepreneurs and the business people and the engineers and just humans. What's out there to be discovered?
Yeah, the metaphor of human beings leaving shore, sailing across the horizon, risking their lives in pursuit of a better life is an incredibly powerful one. In 1900, I suppose the average life expectancy is 50. During the Revolutionary War, while our founding fathers were fighting to establish, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the Constitution, average life expectancy of like 32, somewhere between 32 and 36. So all the sound and the fury doesn't make you live past 32, but what does, right? Antibiotics, conquest of infectious diseases. If we understand the science of infectious disease, sterilizing a knife and harnessing antibiotics gets you from 50 to 70, and that happened fast, right? That happens from 1900 to 1950 or something like that. And I think if you look at the human condition, you ever get on one of those rowing machines where they actually keep track of your watts output when you're, it's like 200 is a lot. Okay, 200 is a lot. So a kilowatt hour is like all the energy that a trained athlete can deliver in a day. And probably not 1% of the people in the world could deliver a kilowatt hour in a day. And the commercial value of a kilowatt hour, the retail value is 11 cents today. And the wholesale value is 2 cents. And so you have to look at the contribution of politicians and philosophers and economists to the human condition. And it's like at best a wash one way or the other. And then if you look at the contribution of John D. Rockefeller, when he delivered you a barrel of oil, and the energy in oil, liquid energy, or the contribution of Tesla, as we deliver electricity, and what's the impact on the human condition if I have electric power, if I have chemical power, if I have wind energy, if I can actually set up a reservoir, create a dam, spin a turbine, and generate energy from a hydraulic source, that's extraordinary, right? And so our ability to cross the ocean, our ability to grow food, our ability to live, it's technology that gets the human race from a brutal life where life expectancy is 30 to a world where life expectancy is 80.
You gave a D minus to the Economists. So are they too like a politician to wash in terms of there's good ideas and bad ideas, and that tiny delta between good and bad is how you squeak past the F plus onto the D minus territory?
I think most economic ideas are bad ideas. Like
most.
But take us back to MIT and you want to solve a fluid dynamics problem, like design the shape of the hull of that ship, or you want to design an airfoil, a wing, or if you want to design an engine or a nozzle in a rocket ship, you wouldn't do it with simple arithmetic. You wouldn't do it with a scalar. There's not a single number, right? It's vector math. Computational fluid dynamics is n-dimensional, higher level math. Complicated stuff. So when an economist says the inflation rate is 2%, that's a scalar. And when an economist says it's not a problem to print more money because the velocity of the money is very low, monetary velocity is low, that's another scalar. Okay, so the truth of the matter is inflation is not a scalar. Inflation is an n-dimensional vector. Money velocity is not a scalar. Saying what's the velocity of money? Oh, it's slow or it's fast. It ignores the question of what medium is the money moving through. In the same way that, what's the speed of sound? Okay, well, what is sound, right? Sound is a compression wave. It's energy moving through a medium, but the speed is different. So, for example, the speed of sound through air is different than the speed of sound through water. And sound moves faster through water. It moves faster through a solid, and it moves faster through a stiffer solid. So there isn't one.
What is the fundamental problem with the way economists reduce the world down to a model? Is it too simple, or is it just even the first principles of constructing the model is wrong?
I think that the fundamental problem is if you see the world as a scalar, you simply pick the one number which supports whatever you want to do, and you ignore the universe of other consequences from your behavior.
In general, I don't know if you've heard of Eric Weinstein has been talking about this with gauge theory. So different kinds of approaches from the physics world, from the mathematical world, to extend past this scalar view of economics. So gauge theory is one way that comes from physics. Do you find that way of exploring economics interesting? So outside of cryptocurrency, outside of the actual technologies and so on, just analysis of how economics works. Do you find that interesting?
Yeah, and I think that if we're going to want to really make any scientific progress in economics, we have to apply much more computationally intensive and richer forms of mathematics.
So simulation, perhaps, or
yeah, when I was at MIT, I studied system dynamics. They taught it at the Sloan School. It was developed by Jay Forrester, who was an extraordinary computer scientist. And when we created models of economic behavior, they were all multidimensional, nonlinear models. So if you want to describe how anything works in the real world, you have to start with the concept of feedback. If I double the price of something, demand will fall, and attempts to create supply will increase, and there will be a delay before the capacity increases. There'll be an instant demand change, and there'll be rippling effects throughout every other segment of the economy, downstream and upstream of such thing. So it's kind of common sense, but most classical economics is always, taught with linear models, fairly simplistic linear models. And oftentimes, I'm really shocked today that the entire mainstream dialogue of economics has been captured by scalar arithmetic. For example, if you read any article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, right, they just refer to there's an inflation number or the CPI, or the inflation rate is X. And if you look at all the historic studies of the impact of inflation, generally they're all based upon the idea that inflation equals CPI, and then they try to extrapolate from that, and you just get nowhere with it.
So at the very least, we should be considering inflation and other economics concepts as a nonlinear dynamical system. So nonlinearity, and also just embracing the full complexity of just how the variables interact, maybe through simulation, maybe have some interesting models around that.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if somebody for once published a table of the change in price of every product, every service, and every asset in every place over time?
You said table. Some of that also is the task of visualization, how to extract from this complex set of numbers patterns that somehow indicate something fundamental about what's happening. So summarization of data is still important. Perhaps summarization not down to a single scale of value, but looking at that whole sea of numbers, you have to find patterns. Like what is inflation in a particular sector? What is maybe change over time? Maybe different geographical regions, things of that nature. I think that's kind of, I don't know even what that task is. That's what you could look at machine learning. You can look at AI with that perspective, which is like, how do you represent what's happening efficiently as possible? That's never going to be a single number, but it might be a compressed model that captures something beautiful, something fundamental about what's happening.
It's an opportunity, for sure. Right? If we take, for example, during the pandemic, the response of the political apparatus was to lower interest rates to zero and to start buying assets, in essence, printing money. And the defense was there's no inflation. But of course, you had one part of the economy where it was locked down, so it was illegal to buy anything. You couldn't, it was either illegal or it was impractical. So it would be impossible for demand to manifest. So of course there was no inflation. On the other hand, there was instantaneous, immediate inflation in another part of the economy. For example, you lowered the interest rates to zero. At one point, we saw the swap rate on a 30-year note go to 72 basis points. Okay, that means that the value of a long-dated bond immediately inflates. So the bond market had hyperinflation within minutes of these financial decisions. The asset market had hyperinflation. We had what you call a K-shaped recovery. Well, we affectionately call it K-shaped recovery. Main Street shut down. Wall Street recovered all within 6 weeks. The inflation was in the assets, like in the stocks, in the bonds. If you look today, you see that typical house, according to the Case-Shiller Index today, is up 19.2% year over year. So if you're a first-time home buyer, the inflation rate is 19%. The formal CPI announced at 7.9%. You can pretty much create any inflation rate you want by constructing a market basket, a weighted basket of products or services or assets that yield you the answer. I think that the fundamental failing of economists is first of all, they don't really have a term for asset inflation. Right?
What's asset hyperinflation? You mentioned bond market swap rate, and asset is where the majority of the hyperinflation happened.
Yeah.
What's inflation? What's hyperinflation? What's an asset? What's an asset market? I'm going to ask so many dumb questions.
In the conventional economic world, you would treat inflation as the rate of increase in price of a market basket of consumer products, defined by a government agency.
Okay. So they have traditional things that a regular consumer would be buying. The government selects like toilet paper, food, toaster, refrigerator, electronics, all that kind of stuff, and it's like a representative basket of goods that lead to a content existence on this earth for a regular consumer.
They define a synthetic metric, right? I mean, I'm going to say you should have a 1,000 square foot apartment, and you should have a used car, and you should eat 3 hamburgers a week. Now 10 years go by, and the apartment costs more. I could adjust the market basket via they call them hedonic adjustments. I could decide that it used to be in 1970 you needed 1,000 square feet, but in the year 2020 you only need 700 square feet because we've miniaturized televisions and we've got more efficient electrical appliances because things have collapsed into the iPhone. You just don't need as much space. So now it may be that the apartment costs 50% more, but after the hedonic adjustment, there is no inflation because I just downgraded the expectation of what a normal person should have.
So the synthetic nature of the metric allows for manipulation by people in power.
Pretty much. I guess my criticism of economists is rather than embracing inflation based upon its fundamental idea, which is the rate at which the price of things go up, right? They've been captured by mainstream conventional thinking to immediately equate inflation to the government-issued CPI or government-issued PCE or government-issued PPI measure, which was never the rate at which things go up. It's simply the rate at which a synthetic basket of products and services the government wishes to track go up. Now, the problem with that is two big things. One thing is the government gets to create the market basket, and so they keep changing what's in the basket over time. So, I mean, if I said 3 years ago you should go see 10 concerts a year, and the concert tickets now cost $200 each, now it's $2,000 a year to go see concerts. Now I'm in charge of calculating inflation, so I redefine, your entertainment quota for the year to be 8 Netflix streaming concerts, and now they don't cost $2,000; they cost nothing, and there's no inflation, but you don't get your concerts, right? So the problem starts with continually changing the definition of the market basket. But in my opinion, that's not the biggest problem. The more egregious problem is the fundamental idea that assets aren't products or services. Assets can't be inflated.
What's an asset?
A house, a share of Apple stock, a bond, a Bitcoin is an asset, or a Picasso painting. So
not a consumable good, not an apple that you can eat.
Right. If I throw away an asset, then I'm not on the hook to track the inflation rate for it. So what happens if I change the policy such that, let's take a classic example, $1 million bond at a 5% interest rate gives you $50,000 a year in risk-free income. You might retire on $50,000 a year in a low-cost jurisdiction. So the cost of Social Security or early retirement is $1 million when the interest rate is 5%. During the crisis of March of 2020, the interest rate went on a 10-year bond went to 50 basis points. So now the cost of that bond is $10 million. Okay, the cost of Social Security went from $1 million to $10 million. So if you wanted to work your entire life, save money, and then retire risk-free and live happily ever after on a $50,000 salary, living on a beach in Mexico, wherever you wanted to go, you had hyperinflation. The cost of your aspiration increased by a factor of 10 over the course of some amount of time. In fact, in that case, that was like over the course of about 12 years. Right? As the inflation rate ground down, the asset traded up. But the conventional view is, oh, that's not a problem because it's good that it's good that the bond is highly priced because we own the bond. Or what's the problem with the inflation rate in housing being 19%? It's an awful problem for a 22-year-old that's starting their first job, that's saving money to buy a house. But it would be characterized as a benefit to society by a conventional economist who would say, well, housing asset values are higher because of interest rate fluctuation, and now the economy's got more wealth. And so that's viewed as a benefit.
So what's being missed here, like the suffering of the average person, or the struggle, the suffering, the pain of the average person, like metrics that capture that within the economic system. Is it when you talk about
one way to say it is a conventional view of inflation as CPI understates the human misery that's inflicted upon the working class and on mainstream companies by the political class. And so it's a massive shift of wealth from the working class to the property class. It's a massive shift of power from the free market to the centrally governed or the controlled market. It's a massive shift of power from the people to the government. And maybe one more illustrative point here, Alexis, is what do you think the inflation rate's been for the past 100 years?
Oh, you're talking about the scaler again?
If you took a survey of everybody on the street and you asked them, what do they think inflation was? What is it? You remember when Jerome Powell said our target's 2%, but we're not there? If you go around the corner, I have posted the deed to this house, sold in 1930. Okay, and the number on that deed is $100,000, 1930. And if you go on Zillow and you get the Z estimate,
Is it higher than that? No.
$30,500,000.
Yeah.
So that's 92 years, 1930 or 2022. And in 92 years, we've had 305x increase in price of the house. Now, if you actually back calculate, you come to a conclusion that the inflation rate was approximately 6.5% a year, every year, for 92 years. Okay, and there's nobody in government, no conventional economist that would ever admit to an inflation rate of 7% a year in the U.S. dollar over the last century. Now, if you dig deeper, I mean, one guy that's done a great job working on this is Seyfedin Amos, who wrote the book The Bitcoin Standard, and he notes that on average, it looks like the inflation rate in the money supply is about 7% a year, all the way up to the year 2020. If you look at the S&P index, which is a market basket of scarce desirable stocks, it returned about 10%. If you talk to 10% a year for 100 years, the money supply is expanding at 7% in 100 years. If you actually talk to economists or you look at the economy and you ask the question, how fast does the economy grow in its entirety year over year? Generally about 2 to 3%. Like the sum total impact of all this technology and human ingenuity might get you a 2.5%, 3% improvement a year.
As measured by GDP. Are you okay with that?
I'm not sure I go that far yet, but I would just say that if you had the human race doing stuff, and if you ask the question, how much more efficiently will we do the stuff next year than this year, or what's the value of all of our innovations and inventions and investments in the past 12 months, you'd be hard pressed to say we get 2% better. Typical investor thinks they're 10% better every year. So if you look at what's going on, really, when you're holding $1 million of stocks and you're getting a 10% gain a year, you really get a 7% expansion of the money supply. You're getting a 2 or 3% gain under best circumstances. And another way to say that is, if the money supply stopped expanding at 7% a year, the S&P yield might be 3% and not 10%. It probably should be. Now, that gets you to start to ask a bunch of other fundamental questions, like if I borrow $1 billion and pay 3% interest and the money supply expands at 7 to 10% a year, and I ended up making a 10% return on a $1 billion investment paying 3% interest, is that fair? And who suffered so that I could do that? Because in an environment where you're just inflating the money supply and you're holding the assets constant, it stands to reason that the price of all the assets is going to appreciate somewhat proportional to the money supply. And the difference in asset appreciation is going to be a function of the scarce desirable quality of the assets and to what extent can I make more of them and to what extent are they truly limited in supply.
Yeah, so we'll get to a lot of the words you said there, the scarcity and so connected to how limited they are and the value of those assets. But you also said, so the expansion of the money supply, which is, put another way, is printing money. And so is that always bad, the expansion of the money supply? Is this just to put some terms on the table so we understand them? You nonchalantly say it's always, on average, expanding every year. The money supply is expanding every year by 7%. That's a bad thing? That's a universally bad thing.
It's awful. I guess to be precise, it's the currency. Money, I would say money is monetary energy or economic energy. And the economic energy has to find its way into a medium. So if you want to move it rapidly as a medium of exchange, it has to find its way into currency. But the money can also flow into property, like a house or gold. If the money flows into property, it'll probably hold its value much better if the money flows into currency, right? If you had put $100,000 in this house, you would have 305x return over 92 years. But if you had put the money, $100,000 in a safe deposit box and buried it in the basement, you would have lost 99.7% of your wealth over the same time period. So the expansion of the currency creates a massive inefficiency in the society, what I'll call an adiabatic lapse. What we're doing is we're bleeding the civilization to death.
What's the adiabatic? What's that word?
Adiabatic lapse.
Adiabatic.
Right. And aerospace engineering, you want to solve any problem, they start with the phrase, assume an adiabatic system. And what that means is closed system. Okay. So I've got a container. And in that container, no air leaves and no air enters. No energy exits or enters. So it's a closed system.
So you got the closed system lapse.
Okay. What's a closed? Okay. I'm going to use
There's a leak in the ship.
I'm going to use a physical metaphor for you because you're the jiu-jitsu, right? Like you got 10 pints of blood in your body. And so before your next workout, I'm going to take 1 pint from you. Now you're going to go exercise, but you've lost 10% of your blood. Okay? You're not going to perform as well. It takes about 1 month for your body to replace the red blood platelets. So what if I tell you every month you got to show up and I'm going to bleed you? Yeah. Okay. So if I'm draining the energy, I'm draining the blood from your body, you can't perform. Adiabatic lapse is when you go up in altitude. Every 1,000 feet, you lose 3 degrees. You go 50,000 feet, you're 150 degrees colder than sea level. That's why you look at your instruments and instead of 80 degrees, you're minus 70 degrees. Why is the temperature falling? Temperature's falling because it's not a closed system, it's an open system. As the air expands, the density falls, right? The energy per cubic whatever, falls, and therefore the temperature falls, right? The heat's falling out of the solution. So when you're inflating, let's say you're inflating the currency supply by 6%, you're sucking 6% of the energy out of the fluid that the economy is using to function.
So the currency, this kind of ocean of currency, that's a nice way for the economy to function. It's the most kind of it's being inefficient when you expand the money supply, but it's liquid. I'm trying to find the right kind of adjective here. It's how you do transactions at a scale of billions.
Currency is the asset we use to move monetary energy around, and you could use the dollar, or you could use the peso, or you could use the bolivar.
Selling houses and buying houses is much more inefficient. You can't transact between billions of people with houses.
Yeah, properties don't make such good mediums of exchange. They make better stores of value, and they have utility value if it's a ship or a house or a plane or a bushel of corn, right?
Can I zoom out Can we keep zooming out until we reach the origin of human civilization? But on the way, you gave economists a D-. I'm not even going to ask you what you give to governments. Do you think their failure, economists and government failure, is malevolence or incompetence?
I think policymakers are well-intentioned, but generally all government policy is inflationary, and it's inflammatory and inflationary. So what I mean by that is, when you have a policy pursuing supply chain independence, if you have an energy policy, if you have a labor policy, if you have a trade policy, if you have any kind of foreign policy, a domestic policy, a manufacturing policy, every one of these, a medical policy, every one of these policies interferes with the free market and generally prevents some rational actor from doing it in a cheaper, more efficient way. So when you layer them on top of each other, they all have to be paid for. If you want to shut down the entire economy for a year, you have to pay for it, right? If you want to fight a war, you have to pay for it, right? If you don't want to use oil or natural gas, you have to pay for it. If you don't want to manufacture semiconductors in China and you want to manufacture them in the US, you got to pay for it. If I rebuild the entire supply chain in Pennsylvania and I hire a bunch of employees and then I unionize the employees, then not only am I idle the factory in the Far East, it goes to 50% capacity. So whatever it sells, it has to raise the price on. And then I drive up the cost of labor for every other manufacturer in the US because I'm competing against them, right? I'm changing the conditions. So everything gets less efficient, everything gets more expensive. And of course, the government couldn't really pay for its policies and its wars with taxes. We didn't pay for World War I with tax. We didn't pay for World War II with tax. We didn't pay for Vietnam with tax. In fact, when you trace this, what you realize is the government never pays for all of its policies with tax.
It's too painful to raise the taxes to truly transparently pay for the things you're doing with taxes, with taxpayer money.
Either that's one interpretation, or it's just too transparent. If people understood the true cost
of war, they wouldn't want to go to war.
If you were told that you would lose 95% of your assets, and 90% of everything you will be taken from you, you might reprioritize your thought about a given policy, and you might not vote for that politician.
But you're still saying incompetence, not malevolence. So fundamentally, government creates a bureaucracy of incompetence. It's kind of how you look at it.
I think a lack of humility, right? If people had more humility, then they would realize
humility about how little they know, how little they understand about the function of complex systems.
It's a phrase from Clint Eastwood's movie Unforgiven, where he says a man's got to know his limitations. I think that a lot of people overestimate what they can accomplish, and experience in life causes you to reevaluate that. So I've done a lot of things in my life, and generally my mistakes were always my good ideas that I enthusiastically pursued, to the detriment of my great ideas that required 150% of my attention to prosper. So I think people pursue too many good ideas. They all sound good, but there's just a limit to what you can accomplish. And everybody underestimates the challenges of implementing an idea, right? And they always overestimate the benefits of the pursuit of that. So I think it's an overconfidence that causes an overexuberance in pursuit of policies. And as the ambition of the government expands, so must the currency supply. Well, I could say the money supply, but let's say the currency supply. You can triple the number of pesos in the economy, but it doesn't triple the amount of manufacturing capacity in the said economy. And it doesn't triple the amount of assets in the economy, it just triples the pesos. So as you increase the currency supply, then the price of all those scarce desirable things will tend to go up rapidly. And the confidence of all of the institutions, the corporations, and the individual actors and trading partners will collapse.
If we take a tangent on a tangent, and we will return soon to the big human civilization question. So the government naturally wants to buy stuff it can't afford. What's the best form of government? Anarchism, libertarianism. So there's not even armies. There's no borders. That's anarchism. The smallest possible. The smallest possible. The
best government would be the least, and the debate will be over that.
When you think about this stuff, do you think about, okay, government is the way it is. I as a person that can generate great ideas, how do I operate in this world? Or do you also think about the big picture? If we start a new civilization somewhere on Mars, do you think about like what's the ultimate form of government? What's at least a promising thing to try?
You know, I have laser eyes on my profile
Yes.
on Twitter, Lex.
What's that mean?
And the significance of laser eyes is to focus on the thing that can make a difference.
Yes.
And if I look at the civilization, I would say half the problems in the civilization are due to the fact that our understanding of economics and money is defective. Half, 50%. I don't know, it's worth $500 trillion worth of problems. Like money represents all the economic energy in the civilization, and it kind of equates to all the products, all the services, and all the assets that we have and we're ever going to have. So that's half. The other half of the problems in the civilization are medical and military and political and philosophical and natural. And I think that there are a lot of different solutions to all those problems, and they are all honorable professions, and they all merit a lifetime of consideration for the specialist in all those areas. I think that what I could offer as constructive is inflation is completely misunderstood as a much bigger problem than we understand it to be. We need to introduce engineering and science techniques into economics if we want to further the human condition. All government policy is inflationary. And another pernicious myth is inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. A famous quote by Milton Friedman, I believe. It's a monetary phenomenon. That is, inflation comes from expanding the currency supply. It's a nice phrase, and it's oftentimes quoted by people that are anti-inflation. But again, it just signifies a lack of appreciation of what the issue is. Inflation is, if I had a currency which was completely non-inflationary, if I never printed another dollar, and if I eliminated fractional reserve banking from the face of the earth, we'd still have inflation. And we'd have inflation as long as we have government that is capable of pursuing any kind of policies that are in themselves inflationary, and generally they all are.
So in general, inflationary is the big characteristic of human nature that governments, collection of groups that have power over others and allocate other people's resources, will try to, intentionally or not, hide the costs of those allocations, like in some tricky ways, whatever the options ever available.
Hiding the cost is like the tertiary thing. Like the primary goal is the government will attempt to do good, right? And
that's the primary problem.
They will attempt to do good, and they will do it. They will do good imperfectly, and they will create oftentimes as much damage, more damage than the good they do. Most government policy will be iatrogenic. It will create more harm than good in the pursuit of it, but it is what it is. The secondary issue is they will unintentionally pay for it by expanding the currency supply without realizing that they're actually paying for it in a suboptimal fashion. They'll collapse their own currencies while they attempt to do good. The tertiary issue is they will mismeasure how badly they're collapsing the currency. So, for example, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and look at the numbers printed by the Fed, they'll say, "Oh, it looks like the dollar's lost 95% of its purchasing power over 100 years." Okay, they sort of fess up that there's a problem, but they make it 95% loss over 100 years. What they don't do is realize it's a 99.7% loss over 80 years. So they will mismeasure just the horrific extent of the monetary policy in pursuit of the foreign policy and the domestic policy, which they overestimate their budget and their means to accomplish their ends, and they underestimate the cost, and they're oblivious to the horrific damage that they do to the civilization, because the mental models that they use that are conventionally taught are wrong, right? The mental model that, like, it's okay, we can print all this money because the velocity of the money is low, right? Because money velocity is a scalar and inflation is a scalar, and we don't see 2% inflation yet, and the money velocity is low, and so it's okay if we print trillions of dollars. Well, the money velocity was immediate, right? The velocity of money through the crypto economy is 10,000 times faster than the velocity of money through the consumer economy, right? It's, I think Nick pointed out when you spoke to him, he said it takes 2 months for a credit card transaction to settle, right? So you want to spend $1 million in the consumer economy, you can move it 6 times a year. You put $1 million into gold will sit in a vault for a decade. Okay, so the velocity of money through gold is 0.1. You put the money in the stock market and you can trade it once a week. The settlement is T plus 2. Maybe you get the 2-to-1 leverage. You might get to a money velocity of 100 a year in the stock market. You put your money into the crypto economy, and these people are settling every 4 hours. And if you're offshore, they're trading with 20x leverage. So if you settle every day and you trade with 20x leverage, you just went to 7,000. Okay. So the velocity of the money varies. I think the politicians, they don't really understand inflation, and they don't understand economics, but you can't blame them, because the economists don't understand economics. Because if they did, they would be creating multivariate computer simulations where they actually put in the price of every piece of housing in every city in the world, the full array of foods and the full array of products and the full array of assets. And then on a monthly basis, they would publish all those results. And that's a high bandwidth requirement. And I think that people don't really want to embrace it. And also, there's the most pernicious thing. There's that phrase, you can't tell people what to think, but you can tell them what to think about. The most pernicious thing is I get you to misunderstand the phenomena so that even when it's happening to you, you don't appreciate that it's a bad thing and you think it's a good thing. So if housing prices are going up 20% year over year, and I say this is great for the American public because most of them are homeowners, then I've misrepresented a phenomena. Inflation is 20%, not 7%, and then I've misrepresented it as being a positive rather than a negative. And people will stare at it, and you could even show them their house on fire, and they would perceive it as being great because it's warming them up, and they're going to save on their heat costs.
It does seem that the cruder the model, whether it's economics, whether it's psychology, the easier it is to weave whatever the heck narrative you want, and not in a malicious way, but just like it's some kind of like emergent phenomena, this narrative thing that we tell ourselves. So you can tell any kind of story about inflation. Inflation is good, inflation is bad. Like the cruder the model, the easier it is to tell a narrative about it. And that's what so like if you take an engineering approach, I feel like it becomes more and more difficult to run away from sort of a true deep understanding of the dynamics of the system.
I mean, honestly, if you went to 100 people on the street and you asked them to define inflation, how many would say it's a vector tracking the change in price of every product, service, asset in the world over time?
No,
not many. Now, if you went to them and you said, do you think 2% inflation a year is good or bad? The majority would probably say, well, here it's good. The majority of economists would say 2% inflation a year is good. And of course, look at the ship next to us. What if I told you that the ship leaked 2%, right, of its volume every something, right? The ship is rotting 2% a year. That means the useful life of the ship is 50 years. Now, ironically, that's true. Like a wooden ship had a 50-year to 100-year life. 100 would be long, 50 years, not unlikely. So when we built ships out of wood, they had a useful life of about 50 years, and then they sunk, they rotted. There's nothing good about it, right? You build a ship out of steel, and it's zero as opposed to 2% degradation. And how much better is 0% versus 2%? Well, 2% means you have a useful life of, it's half-life of 35 years. 2% is a half-life of 35 years. That's basically the half-life of money in gold. If I store your life force in gold, under perfect circumstances, you have a useful life of 35 years. 0% is a useful life of forever. So 0% is immortal. 2% is 35 years average life expectancy. So the idea that you would think the life expectancy of the currency in the civilization should be 35 years instead of forever is kind of a silly notion. But the tragic notion is it was 7 into 7 year, 10 years.
So guys, I was listening to podcast and could not concentrate much on coding. So I think let's wind it up here and we'll continue some other day. Maybe next weekend. I can't focus. I mean, I have other priority tasks to work on between weekdays, so but not able to work on this continuously. So maybe I'll try to let me check like how it goes. If possible, we can continue tomorrow, like for half an hour. We can build a small component every day so that within 2 weeks, I think I can finish my portfolio. So let me show you like what's the progress. There are a lot of typos and grammatical errors. Don't mind that. I'll do a proofreading later on. So yeah, here is a quick preview of what I have built so far. Yeah, that's all guys. I just managed to finish header part and this thing hero section. So it's not responsive, but I think it's decent. A small amount of media queries will work. You need to detect the breakpoints and string this and apply padding on the both the side will work. So yeah, that's all guys. Tomorrow it's Monday, back to work. So yeah, see you tomorrow. Bye.